So today I want to talk with you about Ezekiel 11. And this is from the Septuagint. So it takes me a while to translate from the Septuagint because I don't have the same kind of tools set up that I do for the New Testament text. I'm trying to actually programmatically create the kind of textual tool that I use in the New Testament from the Septuagint text that I have. We are going to be reading here from the Rooted Word translation of the Septuagint. So we're going to be reading from the Common English Edition here today. This says here, "And they will enter in there into the land," that's the context, Israel, "and will remove out of the land all the abominations of it, and all the lawless actions of it. And I will give them another heart, and I will give in them a new spirit, and I will extract out of them, out of their flesh, the stone heart, and I will give them a heart of flesh." Verse 20. "Inasmuch as they may themselves be piercing to traverse in my commandments, and guarding to protect against injury my equitably righteous actions, and be doing them, in that way also to me they will come to be people, and to them will I come to be God. And I gave their ways into their heads in that manner that their heart was itself piercing to traverse into the heart of their abominations and of their lawless actions. I am laying forth in words," Yahweh, his personal name, God. There's our passage. Now you'll say, that sounds vaguely familiar. Yeah, it's one of the most famous passages in Ezekiel that's quoted. But let's not linger on false translations that are based on false manuscripts made by a group of rabbis who come from a school that crucified Jesus. Okay? Leave that all aside. That's the Old Testament in nearly every one of your English Bibles. Let's focus on this, which is the Bible Jesus used and the apostles. "And they will enter into the land, in there, and they will remove all the abominations of it, of the land, and all the lawless actions of the land from out of it, from out of the land." Is that what you're doing? Are you helping to remove the abominations and the lawless actions from out of the church that you attend? From out of the country in which you live and the city in which you dwell? You say, "Ron, how can I do that? I'm not God." No, but you are a witness, aren't you? And if you do not witness in such a way to help remove those things, then what? "Ron, I have enough on my own plate." Jesus said to remove the plank out of your own eye, then you can see to help your brother remove the splinter out of his. Clean up your own house. Stop being slothful about it. Clean it up. Do it quickly. Your brother and your sister, they need you. They're weaker than you. You may not think so, but they are. They need you. Right? Pity the man who's alone and falls down and has no one to help him up, right? Right. And so you can be there to help someone up who has fallen down. But you've got to be ready and strong enough to help them up. So you need to clean up your own house. You need to be witnessing to others in such a way. You don't always have to be saying, "Oh, let me tell you about Jesus." That's not bad. But that's not the only thing that you need to do in order to bring about change in the person. Certainly the name of Jesus is powerful in changing lives, no doubt. But there are other steps as well that need to happen in order to open the heart so that they can have their eyes opened. So, and I take this approach also with Christians, not just with non-Christians, where you're witnessing to non-Christians and you have to talk about other issues like society in general, right? Sexual perversions in the society in America, if you're in America, or whatever the particular things are that you need to address in that society in which this person lives to whom you're witnessing. So I do that with Christian men, where I talk about the covenant with the eyes. That when I'm sitting down across a table in a coffee shop with another Christian man, even a pastor, another pastor or elder or deacon, doesn't matter who it is. Pretty girl goes by in a skirt, their eyes, they don't just notice her, they follow her across the room. I mean, their heads even turn. And I bring up the issue. Have you made a covenant with your eyes to honor the Lord, to not commit adultery, taking her into your heart? It says in Proverbs, just as the grave is never full, so the eyes of man are never satisfied. Comparing the eyes to a grave where dead bodies are buried. You need to be witnessing to them in order to remove the abominations, in order to get rid of the lawless actions from out of it. And they will enter into the land there, and they will remove all the abominations of it. That's the stench of death. That's literally what it means, abomination. A stench of death to God's nose. They will remove all the stenches of death to God's nose and all the lawless actions of the land from out of the land. And I, God speaking, and I will give to them another heart. Notice the obedience happens first before the new heart is given. The obedience to God, that faithfulness and purity to God, where they're purifying themselves and the land in which they live, happens before God gives the new heart. And I will give to them another heart, and I'm reading the precise English. Let's get down to the common English. And I will give them another heart, and I will give in them a new spirit. Spirit, that word means spirit or breath or air. Now there's another word that means air also, but this is air like a stream of air, like a current. So spirit is more like the movement of the air that indicates life. So it's this connection from the inside to the outside around us, the environment. And I will give in them a new spirit. So you had an old spirit, but it wasn't servicing you very well, because it kept driving you into abominations and lawless actions, as it does with everyone else. But God promises that He will give in us a new spirit if we will demonstrate hatred for the stenches of death in God's nostrils and the lawless actions against God's laws. And I will extract out of them, out of their flesh, it says specifically, out of their flesh, the stone heart. And I will give them a heart of flesh. The stone heart doesn't beat. Stone heart looks like a heart in shape, in form, but doesn't function like a heart. But God will give us a heart that functions. Now it gets a little trickier in the next two verses. Inasmuch as they may themselves be piercing to traverse in my commandments. Let's deal with that first. That they may themselves, so they're doing it themselves. They're doing this themselves. It's very strong in the Greek. They're doing it themselves. They're piercing to traverse in my commandments. Not into my commandments, in my commandments. Meaning that they are in God's commandments and traversing to pierce. This is the word that's translated as temptation in the New Testament. You're saying, what? You mean that we are to obey God's commands, and while we're obeying God's commands, tempt people? No. Because it doesn't mean tempt. It's a mistranslation. So the word actually means there are two ways that we have kind of painful testing, right? And it's not always testing either. All right, you've got the piercing, which is this word, where it's a sharp point trying to penetrate a membrane, right? And so it's trying to see how much pressure it takes to penetrate it. It's not just trying to go through it. It's literally testing it, like to see how much it takes before it gives way in this particular spot with one sharp point. Then there is what we call tribulations, which simply means pressure. That's literally what it means. If I said air pressure, I would use this same word. So it's a blunt surface that's pushing all at once in a direction. And it's usually more gradual and more broad. So you're getting pushed in many parts of your life in a certain direction. Doesn't mean it's from God. It means it's a pressure. Whereas the piercing, it's one particular thing and it's quick and sudden. And so it's like a testing right there in such a way where you can't think about it in advance. It's to see what your reaction is in order to reveal what's in your heart. So piercings are extremely important. Pressures you're constantly aware of over a long period of time. In many different areas of your life, you're feeling this pressure this way, this way, this way, this way. And you got to identify whether it's God's leading or if it's something that you need to stand against and resist. But as for piercings, you don't feel those in advance. They just happen like that. Now, with that in mind, let's go back to this. Inasmuch as they may themselves be piercing to traverse in my commandments. So in the obedience of God's commandments, you use that to conduct surprise attacks, not on people, but surprise attacks on some task, something that you have to do. You do it quickly and you do it sharply in a very specific focused place in a focused way in order to penetrate as quickly as you can. Okay? But that can only happen from within God's commandments while you're in obedience to His commandments. And I'm not talking about the law of Moses. I'm talking about obeying God. And if you want to know what that means, then you need to take the 40-day Jesus challenge, where you're reading the gospel accounts for 40 days and only those. You're not going to church. You're not listening to Christian music. You're not reading anything else in the Bible. You're not reading any other books by Christian authors or about Christianity. You're just reading the gospel accounts every day for 40 days. You will learn what God's commandments are by doing that. So inasmuch as they may themselves be piercing to traverse in my commandments, and guarding to protect against injury my equitably righteous actions and be doing them. So the things that are equitably righteous actions of God, you are to be guarding to protect against from injury, that no one injures those. For example, dressing properly for a believer. This is God's righteous actions, His equitably righteous actions that you are to do. But not only are you to do them, you are to guard them against injury. Because there are so many out there calling themselves Christians who want to tear those equitably righteous actions apart. And you must stand your ground and you must protect God's equitably righteous actions while also doing them. It's present active doing them. In that way, inasmuch as we are doing those two things, three things really, guarding and protecting His equitably righteous actions and doing them, that's two things, and piercing to traverse in His commandments, inasmuch as we're doing those things, that way also to me will they come to be people. And to them will I come to be God. Not a people, come to be people. Because if it were a people, then it would have to be a God, because they're the exact same form. And certainly it's not, and to them will I become a God. I will become the category God. And in the context of the Old Testament, the only God. But it's not necessarily the only people. But they will become people, whereas they weren't people to God before. Verse 21. And I gave their ways, this is the trickiest, and I gave their ways, their roads, their paths, into their heads. That's what it literally says. And I gave their ways, their paths, their roads, into their heads. In that manner, so He did it, he gave the kind of roads and ways and paths into their heads in accordance with the following. In that manner that their heart was itself piercing to traverse, trying to penetrate into the heart of their abominations and of their lawless actions. So inasmuch as you still continue to try to penetrate into that heart of stone, from out of which came the abominations and the lawless actions, inasmuch as your heart desires to penetrate back into that, God gives the roads and the ways and the paths into your head. Gives you over to them. You must purify your heart. You must purify your heart. Separate yourself off. Circumcise yourself off from your abominations and your lawless actions. I am laying forth in words, Yahweh. He signed it. I am laying forth in words, Yahweh. He is testifying that this is His testimony. This is what He says and swears is true by Himself. You get a lot to think about, don't you? May the Lord bless you as you seek Him with all your heart.